Retirement is often seen as the golden chapter of life, a time to enjoy the fruits of your labor, explore passions, and embrace the freedom you've earned. Yet for many, this idyllic vision becomes clouded by a painful dilemma, balancing unconditional love for their children with their own independence. Often, this balance tips toward sacrifice, leaving retirees emotionally drained and financially insecure. Welcome to the Elder's Compass. If you're searching for a place that truly understands and supports life's later years with practical wisdom, encouragement, and helpful tips just for you, you're in the right place. If you're ready to face this stage of life with resilience and grace, go ahead and subscribe to our channel. Let the Elder's Compass be your steady guide on this journey. Hit that subscribe button and join our community today. Now let's begin. This is the story of Edward and Helen Turner, a retired couple whose experiences provide profound lessons about boundaries, love, and self-preservation in the later stages of life. Their journey is a testament to the courage it takes to prioritize your happiness and well-being, even when faced with societal expectations and familial pressures. Edward and Helen Turner spent 40 years shaping young minds as educators in a small Midwestern town. Their days marked by dedication and selflessness, both in the classroom and at home. Life was never extravagant for the Turners. Their modest salaries afforded them a comfortable but simple lifestyle, with little room for luxuries. Yet, for Edward and Helen, there was no hesitation in choosing where to focus their efforts. "Our children were everything to us," Helen reflects, her voice carrying the warmth of cherished memories and the weight of years of sacrifice. "We gave up vacations, skipped out on the new car we dreamed of, and often ignored our own needs, all so Brian and Rachel could have the opportunities we never did." The Turner home was filled with the quiet sacrifices of loving parents. Family dinners were planned around budget-friendly meals, and weekends often revolved around free activities at the local library or community center. Every decision, big or small, was carefully made to provide the best possible future for their children. Their devotion went far beyond what most would consider standard parental support. Edward and Helen didn't just ensure Brian and Rachel had a roof over their heads or encouragement for their studies. They went all in. "We didn't just fund their education," Edward recalls. "We made sure Brian graduated college debt-free, even if it meant tutoring on weekends to make ends meet. When he wanted to start his own tech company, I dipped into our retirement fund without a second thought. It was a risk, sure, but he had big dreams, and we wanted to help him chase them." Rachel's needs were no less significant. When she was ready to buy her first home, Helen and Edward covered the down payment. Helen spent hours with Rachel picking out furniture, helping decorate, and stocking the kitchen with essentials. "It wasn't just about the money," Helen adds. "It was about being there, helping them in every way we could. We wanted them to feel supported, like they could rely on us no matter what." Their dedication wasn't limited to financial assistance. When Rachel faced a difficult pregnancy, Helen spent months living with her, cooking meals and watching over her grandchildren. When Brian's business hit a rough patch, Edward became his go-to advisor, offering guidance late into the night. "It didn't matter how tired we were," Helen says. "If they called, we answered, every time." But as the years turned into decades, the boundless generosity that once felt so fulfilling began to take on a different tone. What had once been expressions of love started to feel like obligations. "At first, we didn't see it," Helen admits, her gaze distant as if revisiting the subtle changes over time. "It's not like they stopped loving us, but their gratitude faded. The things we did for them, the sacrifices we made, they became expected, not appreciated." Edward nods solemnly. "We didn't mind giving, but there was a shift. It wasn't just about helping them anymore. It started to feel like they assumed we would always be there to fix things, to fill in the gaps. It wasn't about asking for help, it was about expecting it." Their love for their children never wavered, but the Turners began to feel the emotional toll of always giving without acknowledgement. Helen sums it up with quiet pain. "We gave them everything we could, and somewhere along the way, it started to feel like it wasn't enough for them, or for us." At first, the Turners didn't notice the change. They were used to being the dependable ones, the first phone call in any situation, the safety net their children leaned on without hesitation. When Rachel called, it was always, "Hi Mom, I need your help," or "Dad, could you lend us some money?" Edward recounts. His tone carries no bitterness, just the quiet resignation of someone who didn't question his role at the time. "We thought nothing of it. We were parents after all." It felt natural to step in whenever they needed us. But slowly, the nature of those calls began to shift. They became less about connection and more about transactions. At first, it was small things. Brian needed a bit of money to cover unexpected expenses for his tech startup. Rachel asked for help babysitting so she could attend a work conference. But as time passed, the requests grew bolder and more frequent. Helen sighs, her hands resting in her lap as she recalls the gradual accumulation of demands. It started with things we were happy to help with. A new car for Brian because his old one wasn't reliable enough for business travel. Renovations for Rachel's kitchen to accommodate her growing family. Even paying for childcare so she could advance her career. At the time, we didn't think twice about it. We wanted to be there for them in every way we could. However, the pattern became impossible to ignore. Each new request felt heavier than the last, not because of the financial strain, they had always budgeted carefully, but because of the unspoken assumption behind it. The gratitude that once accompanied their children's asks began to fade, replaced by an air of expectation. Helen's voice softens, tinged with hurt. It wasn't that we didn't want to help, we were happy to. But after a while, it felt like they didn't see what it cost us. Not just in money, but in time, in energy, in the things we gave up for ourselves. The turning point came during a family gathering, one of those rare occasions when both children were under the same roof. Helen had spent days preparing, cooking everyone's favorite dishes, decorating the house with fresh flowers, and setting the table with the fine china she rarely used. For her, these gatherings were precious moments to remind everyone of the love and effort that held their family together. Rachel arrived late, juggling a toddler on her hip and a phone in her hand. She barely glanced at the beautifully set table before launching into a casual request. "Oh, by the way, I was thinking we could redo the backyard deck. You guys should chip in, it's not like you need all that money anymore, right?" Helen froze, a spatula still in her hand, as Edward looked up from carving the roast. Rachel's comment landed with the weight of a slap, though her tone was light, as if she'd just made an observation about the weather. Edward recalls the moment vividly. It wasn't just the words, it was the casualness of it. As if our money wasn't something we had worked for, something we had saved carefully to ensure we could take care of ourselves in old age. It was the assumption that because we were retired, it was no longer ours, it was theirs. That single comment planted a seed of doubt in Edward's mind, one that would grow quietly over the weeks to come. He began to replay moments in his head, the times Brian had called, not to check in, but to ask for a loan, the times Rachel had breezed into their home, dropping off the kids without so much as a thank you. It wasn't the requests themselves that hurt. It was the realization that their children no longer saw them as people with their own needs and desires, but as a resource to be tapped. Helen tried to brush off Rachel's comment, telling herself it was an offhand remark made without thought. But late that night, as they cleared the dishes in silence, Edward broke the quiet. "Do you think they see us as anything more than a bank account?" The question lingered between them, heavy and unanswerable. Helen wanted to argue, to defend their children, but deep down she knew Edward wasn't wrong. She replayed the day in her mind, the casual way Rachel had handed over her children for babysitting, the way Brian had slipped a business proposal onto Edward's desk after dinner, as if it were a foregone conclusion that his parents would fund his next venture. For the first time, Helen allowed herself to consider what Edward had been quietly pondering for weeks. Had they done too much? Had their unwavering support crossed the line from generosity into enabling? These thoughts, once unthinkable, began to take root, forcing Edward and Helen to confront the uncomfortable reality of their family dynamic. Their love for Brian and Rachel was unwavering, but so was the growing realization that their own needs had been pushed aside by their children and, perhaps more painfully, by themselves. The Turners' realization hit like a freight train one chilly winter morning when Edward underwent minor surgery at the age of 72. The procedure wasn't life-threatening, but it was significant enough to warrant a recovery period that left Edward temporarily dependent on others. For the first time in decades, the Turners found themselves in a position where they needed help. Not financial assistance, but the kind of emotional and practical support they had so readily given their children for years. "We thought our children would be there for us," Edward recalls, his voice steady but tinged with a hint of disbelief. "I assumed Brian would rearrange his schedule, and Rachel would at least check in regularly." But reality fell far short of those expectations. Brian, always immersed in his work, sent a brief text. "Hope everything goes well, Dad. Can't talk much, big project this week." Rachel's response was even more disheartening. Days passed without so much as a phone call. When she finally did get in touch, it was after Edward had already returned home from the hospital, her tone casual and rushed. "Sorry, Dad, things have been crazy with the kids," she said. Helen still bristles when she remembers that time. "I was heartbroken," she says, her hands clasped tightly together. "After everything we'd done for them, every sacrifice, every sleepless night, they couldn't even be bothered to show up when we needed them most. It wasn't just disappointing, it was devastating." The sting of their absence deepened as the recovery days dragged on. Helen, in her late 60s, did her best to care for Edward, preparing meals, managing his medications, and helping him navigate the stairs in their home. But the physical strain was nothing compared to the emotional weight. Edward learned the full extent of their children's indifference when a neighbor stopped by with soup and shared an offhand remark. "It's a shame Brian's missing all this," the neighbor said. "But I suppose he deserves the break after all his hard work." Confused, Edward asked what she meant. "Oh," the neighbor replied, "didn't you know? I saw the photos of his family at the beach. Looked like a beautiful vacation." Edward's chest tightened as he processed the words. His son, who had texted about being too busy with work, had instead chosen to spend that time on a family vacation. It wasn't just about the absence, Edward reflects, his voice heavy with the weight of betrayal. It was the realization that we had enabled them to take us for granted. We weren't a priority to them. Not even close. As Edward recovered, the Turners began to piece together the patterns of behavior that had led them to this point. It wasn't just this one incident, though it served as a glaring example. It was years of small, seemingly insignificant moments that had chipped away at their trust and faith in their relationship with their children. Helen recalls sitting by Edward's bedside late one evening, scrolling through photos on social media. There was Brian, smiling on the beach with his wife and kids. The caption read, "Family first." I stared at those words for what felt like forever. It was like a slap in the face. How could he write that when he'd abandoned his father in a time of need? The situation with Rachel was no better. When Helen called her for support, Rachel responded with a flurry of excuses about her kids' busy schedules and the challenges of managing work and home life. She acted as though I was asking for a monumental favor, Helen says. All I wanted was a little help, a little care. But to her, it seemed like a burden she couldn't bear. For the first time in their lives, the Turners began to question the very foundation of their family dynamic. Had they given too much? Had their relentless generosity bred complacency instead of gratitude? I started thinking about all the times we'd gone out of our way for them, Edward says. The down payments, the childcare, the endless favors. We never said no. And somewhere along the way, they stopped seeing us as people with needs of our own. We became a resource to them, a resource they assumed would always be there. The pain of this realization wasn't just about feeling unappreciated. It was about confronting the uncomfortable truth that they had played a role in creating this dynamic. We wanted to give them everything, Helen admits, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. We thought that's what good parents do. But in trying to protect them from struggle, we may have robbed them of the ability to truly value what we gave. Edward nods, his expression thoughtful. It's not that they're bad people. Brian and Rachel are good kids. They're successful, hardworking, and loving parents to their own children. But somewhere along the line, they stopped seeing us as individuals. To them, we're just Mom and Dad. And Mom and Dad are supposed to give. Always. The realization was a bitter pill to swallow. For decades, the Turners had built their lives around their children's needs, believing that their sacrifices would foster a bond of mutual care and respect. Instead, they found themselves feeling isolated and overlooked in the very years they had hoped would be filled with family closeness. One afternoon, as Helen prepared lunch for Edward, she broke down. "I can't do this anymore," she said, her voice trembling. "I can't keep pretending this doesn't hurt. I feel like we've lost them, Edward. Not because they've left, but because they don't see us anymore." Edward reached for her hand, his own eyes clouded with emotion. "I know," he said softly. "I feel it too. But we have to figure out what to do next. We can't keep living like this, giving and giving, only to be left feeling empty." For the first time in their marriage, the Turners began to entertain the idea of change. Not just in their relationship with their children, but in the way they approached their own lives. It was a daunting prospect, but one that felt increasingly necessary. "We realized we couldn't keep sacrificing ourselves," Edward says. "Not for people who didn't even notice." And so, with heavy hearts and a newfound resolve, the Turners began to lay the groundwork for a new chapter in their lives, one that would prioritize their needs, their happiness, and their well-being, even if it meant redefining their relationships with the children they loved so deeply. Determined to reclaim their independence and redefine their relationships, the Turners made a bold decision. They would no longer provide financial support to their children unless it was a genuine emergency. It wasn't a decision they came to lightly, nor one made without emotional conflict. At first it felt selfish, Helen admits, her voice carrying a tinge of guilt. For so many years we had defined ourselves by what we could give. Saying no felt unnatural, almost cruel. But then we realized, if we didn't take care of ourselves, no one else would. The first step was setting clear boundaries. Together, Edward and Helen sat down to evaluate their finances and outline their priorities. They created a budget that focused on their retirement savings, medical needs, and personal goals. Travel, hobbies, and quality of life took precedence over their children's ever-growing demands. When Brian called to request a loan for his second business venture, Edward found himself at a crossroads. It wasn't easy, he recalls. "I've always been the dad who said yes, but this time I calmly explained that we couldn't afford to take that risk. I told him, 'You're capable of finding another way.' And he was. He didn't like it, but he managed." Rachel's reaction was more emotional. When Helen gently declined to contribute to Rachel's planned kitchen renovation, her daughter's frustration was palpable. "She accused us of being stingy," Helen says, her expression a mix of sadness and resolve. "She said, 'You can afford it. Why wouldn't you help?' But I knew that agreeing would only reinforce the unhealthy dynamic we'd fallen into. It was time to set boundaries, even if it hurt." The conversations were difficult, often leaving Helen and Edward emotionally drained. But with each passing request, they grew stronger in their resolve. They realized that by continually stepping in, they weren't just harming themselves. They were depriving their children of the opportunity to grow and face challenges independently. "We weren't saying no out of spite," Edward explains. "We were saying no because we wanted them to learn resilience. Life doesn't always hand you what you want, and that's okay. We had to let them figure that out for themselves." With the boundaries firmly in place, Edward and Helen began to experience a sense of liberation they hadn't felt in decades. The weight of constant obligations lifted, leaving space for something they had long neglected: themselves. One of their first major decisions was to downsize from their sprawling family home, a place filled with memories, but also with the echoes of expectations they no longer wanted to shoulder. They sold the house and moved to a cozy condo in Florida, a place where they could soak up the sunshine and embrace a slower, simpler life. It felt like a fresh start, Helen says, her eyes lighting up. We weren't tied to the past anymore. We could focus on what made us happy. For Helen, that happiness came in the form of painting, a hobby she had always dreamed of pursuing but never had the time or confidence to explore. She enrolled in a local art class, spending her mornings experimenting with colors and textures. "At first, I was nervous," she admits with a laugh. I kept thinking, what if I'm terrible at this? But then I realized, it doesn't matter. I'm doing it for me, and that's enough. Edward, meanwhile, found solace in rediscovering an old passion for woodworking. He set up a small workshop in their garage, spending hours crafting intricate birdhouses and small pieces of furniture. It's meditative, he says. There's something so satisfying about creating something with your hands, especially when it's just for the joy of it. The Turners also found delight in the simple moments of everyday life. Sunset walks along the beach, Sunday brunches at their favorite cafe, and quiet evenings spent reading or sharing stories. Without the weight of constant obligations, they were able to reconnect with each other in ways they hadn't since their early years of marriage. It's amazing how much you rediscover when you take a step back, Helen reflects. I started to see Edward not just as my partner in parenting, but as the man I fell in love with. We laughed more, talked more, and just enjoyed being together. Their newfound freedom extended beyond their individual pursuits. They planned a long overdue trip to Europe, something they had always talked about but never prioritized amidst their responsibilities. Wandering the cobblestone streets of Italy and savoring the vineyards of France, they felt a renewed sense of wonder and adventure. Traveling reminded us that life is so much bigger than we often realize. Edward says, "We spent so many years focused on our family that we forgot how much there is to see and experience in the world. It was like waking up again." For the Turners, this chapter of life wasn't just about reclaiming independence. It was about redefining happiness. It was about finding joy, not in what they could give to others, but in what they could create, experience, and savor for themselves. And for the first time in years, they felt truly free. Edward and Helen's story is a powerful reminder of the importance of self-preservation in the later stages of life. Their journey offers profound lessons for retirees everywhere, lessons born not from anger or resentment, but from the deep love that seeks balance, wisdom, and mutual respect. For years, the Turners gave endlessly, believing that their sacrifices were the ultimate expression of love. But their journey taught them that love must also include boundaries. It's not about turning away from your children or refusing to help when they genuinely need it. It's about recognizing that an open faucet eventually runs dry. By setting limits, you protect your financial well-being and your emotional health, creating space to focus on what truly matters: your happiness, your independence, and the life you've worked so hard to build. Retirement is a sacred time, the culmination of decades of effort and sacrifice. It's not selfish to pursue hobbies, explore new passions, or travel to places you've always dreamed of visiting. It's your time, a chapter that belongs to you, where joy and fulfillment should take center stage. Edward and Helen discovered this in the vibrant colors of Helen's paintings, in the quiet hum of Edward's woodworking tools, and in the shared laughter of evenings spent together, free from the weight of constant obligations. Their story reminds us all that happiness is not just something we give to others. It's something we owe to ourselves. Another lesson the Turners' journey highlights is the importance of encouraging self-reliance. Stepping back and allowing your children to face their own challenges isn't an act of abandonment, it's an act of trust. It says, "I believe in your strength. I believe in your ability to navigate life." For Edward and Helen, saying no to financial demands wasn't about withholding love, it was about empowering their children to grow. By doing so, they not only reclaimed their own lives, but also gave Brian and Rachel the chance to develop resilience and independence. Lastly, the Turners' experience underscores the necessity of planning for the unexpected. Life, as they learned, can change in an instant. Medical emergencies, rising costs, and unforeseen challenges are inevitable, and having the financial stability to face them is crucial. Prioritizing your savings is not just a practical decision. It's a form of self-respect, a way of ensuring peace of mind as you navigate the uncertainties of aging. Edward and Helen realized that their savings were more than just numbers in a bank account. They were a safety net, a tool to preserve their dignity and autonomy in the years to come. Their journey is a testament to the fact that retirement is not the end of giving, but a time to redefine what giving means. It's about giving yourself permission to live fully, giving your children the opportunity to grow, and giving the world a version of yourself that is whole, fulfilled, and truly at peace. Edward and Helen's story isn't just a lesson for retirees. It's a call to action for all of us at every stage of life to honor the balance between love for others and love for ourselves. Now it's your turn to reflect on your own journey. Have you given yourself permission to prioritize your happiness? Have you embraced the freedom to say no, to set boundaries, and to pursue the life you've always wanted? Remember, retirement is not the end of giving, but an opportunity to redefine what giving truly means. If these stories resonate with you, don't keep them to yourself. Share this message with someone who might need a gentle nudge to take control of their retirement years. Perhaps they too are grappling with feelings of obligation or struggling to reclaim their independence. Your encouragement could be the spark they need to begin their own journey of self-discovery. We also want to hear from you. What lessons have you learned in your retirement? Have you faced a moment where you had to put your needs first? Share your story in the comments below. Your voice matters, and your experiences could inspire someone else to take that first step toward a fulfilling and empowered life. And if you're ready to embrace this stage of life with resilience and grace, join us at the Elders Compass. Subscribe to our channel for more inspiring stories, practical advice, and heartfelt insights tailored for this incredible stage of life. Together, we can navigate the complexities of aging, find joy in the everyday, and celebrate the possibilities that lie ahead. Your golden years are waiting. Step into them boldly. This is your time to thrive, to rediscover, and to claim the happiness you so deeply deserve. Let's take this journey together.